In 1952, the United States government launched its first major investigation into the UFO phenomenon called Project Blue Book. More than 5 decades later, in 2007, the government initiated its second serious UFO project, called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. There is only one man who was a key contributor to both of these efforts, and he remains at the forefront of UFO research even today, Dr. Jacques Vallée. I don't know of anybody else like Jacques Vallée in the UFO field. He brings scientific background, artificial intelligence, computer engineering training, and insatiable curiosity to the phenomena. He has degrees in mathematics and astrophysics, and a PhD in computer science, and his ideas have had such a tremendous impact on ufology as a serious subject. It validates its study among academics. Jacques Vallée is, in my estimation, not only the deepest thinker, but the best writer to ever tackle the UFO mystery. He's the author of several seminal books, deeply influential in the field. He's helped to sort of expand what we think of as the UFO world. He's one of the first people that asked the question, is it possible that these ancient stories that we have, are they identical to what we see with a modern-day UFO phenomenon? I honestly believe, if you look at the whole history of just UFO researchers, you could really say that Jacqueline is the most brilliant of them all. Still, people ask me, do you believe in UFOs? Well, you shouldn't wonder if you want to be a believer or a non-believer. Was a scientist, I mean. There are reports of UFOs, and I want to study those reports to see if there is a pattern, and what that pattern would tell me about what is happening, and how we could design a methodology to study it. This is pure science. As one of the first people to suggest that UFOs are not only a modern-day phenomenon, Joan Fillet is considered a pioneer by both apologists and ancient astronaut theorists alike. For Vallée, UFOs have been a lifelong passion, one that was sparked by his very own close encounter. Pontoise, France. May 1955. On a bright afternoon in this small town, 30 miles northwest of Paris, 15-year-old Jacques Vallée comes running out of his house when he hears his mother calling out from the garden. I saw an object that, to this day, and all I have to say, was a UFO. It was a very clear disc. It was in the direction of the church of the city. This was not any airplane that you could imagine. So the next day, I spoke to a friend of mine from the college, and he had seen it too. His house was about half a mile up the hill from us, and he had looked at it with binoculars, and I asked him to draw it, and what he drew was exactly the same thing I saw. What was interesting is that Jacques Vallée has his friend draw what he sees. Very kind of good investigative technique there. So you could really see, even as a young man, he was approaching this as rationally and scientifically as you're able to do. And that's a path that he has always followed. The encounter had a profound effect on young Jacques Vallée, who went on to study mathematics and astrophysics before being hired to work as an astronomer at the Paris Observatory in 1961. While there, he took advantage of the observatory's computer to advance his UFO research, comparing data from reports all over the world. I started using the computer to find out about patterns among UFOs, and that's when I really became interested and felt that I could make a contribution. And after that, I was recruited by the University of Texas. They knew exactly what I had been doing with the computer, that they said, you know, that I could use the computer in Austin to work, to look for UFO patterns. So this was a very exciting. After that, in 1962, Vallée moved to Austin, Texas to work with astronomers mapping the planet Mars. But his plans soon changed when he got an opportunity to meet Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Dr. Hynek was the chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University. But more importantly to Jacques Vallée, he was also the scientific advisor for one of the first government task forces to investigate the UFO Phenomenon Project Blue Book. Begun in March of 1952. The classified U.S. Air Force project studied UFO reports and signings to determine whether they were a threat to national security. My wife and I flew from Austin to Chicago and met with Hynek, and I had brought some of my database records of close encounter cases in Europe, and especially in France, and the statistics I had done from the database on the computer from Austin. And Dr. Hynek was very interested because, of course, the Air Force was a community records under Project Blue Book. At the age of 24, Jean Vallée began working as an aide for Hynek on Project Blue Book and spent 4 years going through the 20,000 UFO cases on file. Dr. Hynek said, as an astronomer, you're supposed to be curious. You're not there just to explain things to the public. You're there to look at the mysteries, and if there is a mystery, that's your job to document it, to try to do the work for it. Hynek became Vallée's mentor, and clearly Hynek recognized something in Jacques Vallée. He said, wow, you know, he is a smart person, a scientist, fellow scientist, interested in, knowledgeable about and passionate about UFOs, but wanting to apply exactly the sort of scientific methodology that Hynek was, of course, interested in. So the two men became colleagues and indeed friends. According to J. Allen Hynek's son, Paul Vallée became his father's most trusted ally. There were a parade of graduate students and fellow professors at our house all the time, and yet I could see the special fondness and reverence my father had for Jacques. Jacques became an invaluable friend and colleague of my father, somebody whom my father deeply respected, who was unflinchingly honest about the phenomena, and I would say courageous, about pushing the boundaries of mainstream science out just a little bit further. The collaboration of two men of such impeccable scientific qualifications enriched the field beyond belief. This was a defining moment in the history of ufology. Together, Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek not only helped to legitimize the study of UFOs, but they also became convinced that the objects been witnessed are not of man-made origin, and one case that made a bigger impression than all the rest involved an enormous craft, a landing, and even alien beings. Northwestern University, 1964. While working towards PhDs in both industrial engineering and computer science, Jacques Vallée encourages his mentor, J. Allen Hynek, to consider investigating not only reports of objects in the sky, but also evidence on the ground. I kept talking to him about landings, which he called it close encounters, and the term stuck. Of course, I just called it landings, and where there were traces on the ground and so on. That could be looked at physically. And then he said that you go through the Air Force files, and you're going to see very, very few landings. And I said, well, let me go for the facts, and I'll show you some landing. The reason they didn't show up was, and they were all explained as aberrations of hallucinations. But you would find very credible witnesses, and you would find traces, and the thing that clinched it was the case in Socorro, New Mexico. In Socorro, not only was there a landing, there were beings. Socorro, New Mexico, April 24, 1964. 5:45 p.m. While chasing a speeding car, Police Sergeant Lonnie Zamora hears a thunderous roar and sees a flame in the sky to the southwest. Thinking a local dynamite check might have exploded, Zamora leaves the chase to investigate. I put a lamp out the window, plucked to my left, my phone swiped. Ink-shaped looking object. Bonnie Zamora sees something. A landed craft. Essentially egg-shaped. He sees some figures, and he says afterwards, they were either big children or small adults. Which again raises the question, were these extraterrestrials, as many believe? Suddenly, when he got reasonably close, they got back in and this thing took off. Zamora examined the area with fellow police sergeant Sam Chavez. Both officers documented that the brush was burning in several places, and the object had left 4 perpendicular impressions on the ground. Dozens of other investigators arrived on the scene shortly after the incident, and in the days that followed, you had actually 4 levels of investigation. You had the Socorro cops. You had the FBI happen to be there. You had the security detail from the airfield. You had special investigations with the Air Force, sending Dr. Hynek, and that became part of Frederick Newberg, as an unidentified, by all the investigators who had been there. I certainly believe that Lanny Zammer had a most interesting and significant experience, and I'm particularly interested in the tracks that were left, and the analysis of the samples of material from those tracks until you know more about it. Then all I can figure out is, disappointingly to you perhaps, is simply that I'm as puzzled as you are. Jacques told me that it was this case that was more or less the straw that broke the camel's back, that made my father feel comfortable speaking about beings, as opposed to just crafts in public. It was a difficult transition for Dr. Hynek to admit that yes, not only were landings important, but they were the greater source of actual physical data that you could take to the lab for Jean Vallée. Collecting data is the key to solving the UFO mystery. As part of his effort to create a global UFO database, Vallée, with the help from Dr. Hynek, began building an international network of scientists investigating the phenomenon. They called themselves the Invisible College, taking the name from a group of 18th century European scholars. This was similar to what happened in the 18th century with the Invisible College, and they did a lot of early astronomy, early physics, chemistry, biology, and so on, and the only reason they were not hung or killed as witches was because they were protected by the king. Dr. Hynek thought we were sort of the new iteration of the Invisible College. People like Costardo Borgera in France, like Professor Chauvin in France, were internationally known in their fields, or biology, relativity, and so. But they were very interested in talking about UFOs with us. Of course, this was very secret. The Invisible College began in Dr. Hynek's home, where we clear monthly. He would have scientists from all around the world visit his house, and there they would discuss the UFO topic. But they all were sworn to secrecy because at the time, you couldn't talk about it in seriousness, especially in the world of academia. Although most members of the Invisible College remained anonymous, Jacques Vallée did not. And in 1965 he published Anatomy of a Phenomenon, one of the earliest books written about the UFO subject by a scientist. Anatomy of Phenomenon was a very, very strong compilation of these UFO reports. At that time he's looking at the data, organizing it, and it really made his name in the UFO field. But as Vallée was forging his reputation in the field of ufology, the US government was looking for a way to end its UFO investigations. In 1966, the so-called Condon Committee, led by physicist Edward Condon, was commissioned by the US Air Force to assess whether to continue funding studies like Project Blue Book. Their job, supposedly, was to make a determination scientifically. Is this real? Is this not real? What should the Air Force do? Should the Air Force drop Project Blue Book? And the answer is nothing to it. It's not worthy of further scientific investigation. When the Condon study began, it became obvious that it was rigged to give a negative conclusion. I didn't want to stay in the US under those conditions. I thought, if that's what science is in America, we don't belong in America. After a disappointing end to his time at Project Blue Book, Jean Vallée moved back to Paris with his wife and son. But as backlash against UFO research spread in the public sphere of science and academics, Jean Vallée would develop his most profound UFO theory yet, that aliens have always been among us. Paris, May 1968. 30-year-old Jacques Vallée is working as an engineer for the Royal Dutch Shell oil and gas company when civil unrest erupts throughout France. triggered by a series of student protests against capitalism and consumerism. The unrest leads to a nationwide strike. Essentially, there were 3 months during which no work was done, so I could go back to my own research interests full time. I collected the number of books in areas that I had wanted to look at for a long time. And the question, which is really a scientific question, is so we have UFOs. In UFO waves. When did that really start? The lead discovered that accounts of mysterious objects in the sky weren't limited to contemporary reports. In fact, the more he dug into the origins of the UFO phenomenon, the further back in time he went. There is a lot of literature from the Muslim world about jinn and about other creatures created by God, but along with men and animals. So I started looking at this, and what dawned on me was that you could go back in history, and people will interpret it in religious terms, as either evil or angels or religious operations. Changli noticed some connections between modern-day UFO sightings and ancient folkloric tales of strange lights, and even entity encounters. And he said, look, this could be the same phenomenon, but just people use different words, according to their language, according to their belief systems. I looked especially in Europe. So many of those were fairy tales when I heard as a kid. It turns out they come from real observations, with few folklore experts. In the 19th century and early 20th century, in Ireland and the Wales and Scotland, and going around, collecting actual reports of people encountering, not just little people, but little people with strange contraptions, strange houses where you would lose your sense of time. You'd come out and years would have passed. And so you're beginning to see that these people were confronted with another race, that there was communication with it. Jacques Vallée realized that many of the stories that we have in the Middle Ages, of trolls and fairy folk and things like that, it reminded him of similar stories that we have today in the UFO world. So he asked the question, is it possible that these ancient stories that we have, are they identical to what we see with a modern-day UFO phenomenon? In 1969, Jean Fillet published the culmination of this research in a book titled Passport to Megonia, named for the fabled cloud realm, detailed in medieval French folklore. In that book he describes that perhaps some of those old stories and legends of fairy folk are not necessarily made up, but that they may be descriptions of visiting extraterrestrials that our ancestors then interpreted as fairy folk. Passport to Megonia was a game changer to suggest that these things, whatever they are, interact with humans throughout human history, on every continent and every culture. At this time, the primary thought about extraterrestrials was UFOs only started showing up in 1947 with the Ganeth Arnold sighting, but Vallée is starting to see that they've always been here, that they've shown up in culture after culture, and saying that this phenomena has always been with us. With Passport to Megonia, Jean Fillet became a seminal figure to not only ufologists, but also ancient astronaut theorists, and his book came out within just a few months of Swiss author Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, which also posed the possibility that extraterrestrials had visited Earth in the distant past. When you read the words of Jacques Vallée, you can't help but be thinking of the work of Erich von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, and has Porta Megonia come to the same conclusion? This is an ancient phenomenon. I adore some of the writings of Jacques. Is a brilliant man, and of course out there in the universe, there might be different forms of exploration. Not only human form, they might be small beings, bigger beings, giants. We have no idea. Ancient astronaut theorists cite Megonia as one of many instances when Jacques Vallée found himself at the forefront of UFO research, pushing the boundaries of what many deemed impossible. But its most groundbreaking theories were still to come. Theories that would challenge our understanding of not just UFOs, but the entire cosmos. Stanford University 1972. Jean Vallée is recruited by the National Science Foundation to work as a principal investigator on a project known as Harponet. It was here where he helped build the first public computer network ever developed, and it is considered by many to be the forerunner of the Internet. How far was the Advanced Research Project Agency of the Pelican? There are 15 computing centers at universities. At Stanford Research Institute, we had Site No. 2, the second computer on the Internet. I ran one of the projects of many, and we implemented the first computer conferencing systems when the Internet was going to turn into the Internet. This is an incredible part of a ballet story that goes to Silicon Valley and becomes amazingly successful. In the early days of our pendant, while working as a senior research engineer at Stanford, on his own time Lay continued to compile reports on unidentified aerial phenomenon, and the more information he gathered, the more he began to question the very nature of UFOs. What I found was that the ufologists were still talking about UFOs like they were advanced airplanes. Well, that ignores pretty much everything that UFOs do. Whatever propulsion there is certainly not anything that we account for in our equations. And you ask the witnesses how fast did it go off, and they say make lifted and then it disappear. And the interpretation is that they turn on the afterburners and they go boom. And you don't see that many. That's so true. Vallée came to believe, based on the evidence that he saw in the literary tradition, as well as what he's seen in the sightings and the documentation, that perhaps what we're actually dealing with is an interdimensional phenomenon, and that extraterrestrials are in fact coming from other dimensions. Jacques Vallée was one of the first scientists to ever bring in a multi-dimensional theory in context with the UFO topic. Jacques was ahead of his time, and he's open-minded enough as a scientist be able to go there and be very passionate about it. Jacques Vallée changed his opinion from nuts and bolts spacecraft to it being that we live in a multiverse, and that multiple existences are happening all at the same time. And some of the UFO sightings might be these blips of these civilizations being able to move between dimensions. The idea that we are in a universe that has more than 3 or 4 dimensions of time. That's passive from physics. Going back to 50 years ago, I talked to scientists, to physicists, and they tell me that essentially space and time are human perceptions, and that's where physics stands now. This doesn't come from UFO people. It comes from hard physics. And I think part of my job, I'm not good enough physicist to contribute to those ideas, but I can bring fuel to the discussion. Jean Vallée shared his idea of interdimensional travelers with his former colleague and longtime friend J. Allen Hynek, and together they published the theory in the 1975 book, The Edge of Reality. Mr. Vallée opened the door to a new kind of ufology. Not just little green man with flying saucers landing on the White House lawn, but creatures from another dimension. Creatures that can go through doorways and go between universes. The Leon Hynek's controversial ideas captured the imagination of the public, and not long after the book was released, they also caught the attention of Hollywood's most celebrated new filmmaker Steven Spielberg. I'm convinced there's something going on, but no one really knows what it is. Dr. Honey certainly doesn't know what it is. I have theories. He has theories. No one really can put their finger on it. If they could, the mystery would be solved. Jacques Vallée's influence was so profound that he came to the attention of director Steven Spielberg. Vallée is the model for the character of Claude Lecorne, the French scientist that we see in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I heard of it who? Dr. Hynek. That one of the characters was based on me. And then there was a reporter in Hollywood. They invited Steven Spielberg to lunch with us. and the three of us had a conversation about the movie, and he confirmed that they wanted the scientists to would be from another culture, and not American but from another culture, and would think about it in different ways. And Steven Spielberg told me he had read my first books, and I told me the phenomenon was published in '65, which meant he was studying the subject way back. It was wonderful because usually in Hollywood, you know, the aliens come down and they start shooting. And that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to show the interaction, the human compact, grossing over $300 million worldwide. Close Encounters became a blockbuster hit and sparked greater public interest in both the UFO mystery and Jacques Vallée. And in the decades to come, Vallée would once again find himself at the center of a secret UFO investigation run by the US government, Silicon Valley, California. As the end of the 20th century approaches, French scientist and astronomer Jacques Vallée turns his focus to funding emerging technologies, spearheading advancements in everything from wireless networks to biotech and nanotechnology. Vallée is also interested in bringing new ethology into a new technological age. And in 1995 he gets his opportunity when he meets aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow. In the mid-1990s, billionaire Robert Bigelow enters the UFO scene, and he is funding a civilian scientific effort, the National Institute for Discovery Science, that's looking into the phenomena and other related phenomena, and he brings together some of the very best in the field, and of course, naturally this brings him to Jacques Vallée. The research that Mr. Bigelow funded was absolutely remarkable, you know. In science, you have lots of good scientists with good ideas, but you need somebody who has a vision of where the enterprise is going to go. Mr. Bigelow is just a remarkable business leader. Bigelow created his own UFO organization, devoted to figuring out the UFO mystery. He had this amazing group of people, and Jacques Vallée was one of them. Those relationships became seminal to the development of the UFO topic. In the decades since, working with Bigelow, Vallée created the most comprehensive UFO database in modern history, called the Capella Program. It uses artificial intelligence to investigate patterns behind the UFO phenomenon. Dr. Vallée has amassed a database consisting of over 260,000 documents, all UAP related. I took him 60 years almost to amass this. Perhaps we can use the new tools of AI, for example, to crunch those 260,000 documents once again. And maybe AI will recognize some pattern. If you tell me about something you've seen in the sky, there are some possibilities that will come to me. Maybe it's an airplane, maybe it's a cloud, maybe it's a reflection of the moon. And there are another 200 possibilities my brain isn't capable of thinking of. AI can help. I'm a physicist, and step one of being a physicist is to collect the data. That's the first thing you do. And that's what Vallée has done here. Vallée is the very first to apply computer science to the study of UFO sightings, and in every way is finding a way to apply modern technology to the UFO phenomena. In December 2017, nearly a decade after Vallée created the Capella database, a bombshell New York Times article revealed that Robert Bigelow was part of a secret military project known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. The program was conducted from 2007 to 2012, receiving $22 million in congressional funding. This turned the whole UFO world upside down, and people were kind of blown away, because the US government had always said, we have no interest in UFOs. This is not a thing. What we have learned subsequently is the ATIP program clearly was using the Capella database, putting more money into it and working to build it. So Vallée ended up having a tremendous impact on this secret UFO program that now we all know about. To many ufologists across the world, the unmasking of Asia and its use of a lace Capella database marked the beginning of a new era It was the first time that the US government openly acknowledged the UFO issue since the end of Project Blue Book, more than 50 years earlier, for which Jacques Vallée was also a key contributor. And this is an incredible part of Vallée's story, that beginning in the 1950s, he's starting to create databases of UFO sightings. 2017 comes this blockbuster report. He's almost like a passing-through character. But yet here he is, and what's he doing? Building a database. It's all about the accumulation of these stories and the insights that are contained within most contemporary data we have. Unfortunately, it's still justified, but we can already see a lot from what we've done with smaller databases that Republic. I trust that the people are doing a good job of working with it, so we should have some better answers in time. As ufology enters a new chapter in the 21st century, Gentile remains as relevant as ever, and he is now lending his expertise to a groundbreaking effort to identify objects in space that might be harboring extraterrestrial technology. Cambridge, Massachusetts, July 2, 2021. Harvard astronomer and astrophysicist AFI Loeb launches a new scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence called the Galileo Project. Loeb of Harvard is a reputable scientist who made lots of waves by talking about investigating extraterrestrial civilizations' technology. Professor Loeb says, why not monitor meteors and things in outer space? Perhaps one of them is remnants of an advanced civilization. That's the Galileo Project. Among the many experts who are contributing to the Galileo Project is Jacques. We know what equipment we can deploy about objects that are in the atmosphere. We want to know if they are coming in and out of the atmosphere, and where do they go? Astronomers have been asking those questions for a long time with the Galileo Project. I'm very thankful that I was able to work with people who were just giving their time and their life to this. It's just pure science. After nearly 70 years of investigating and documenting UFOs, from assisting J. Allen Hynek on Project Blue Book, to publishing groundbreaking books, and creating the world's largest UFO database, Vallée is hopeful that his work has brought humanity closer to solving an age-old mystery, one that dates to the dawn of recorded history. Jacques Vallée's contributions to the UFO field are immeasurably valuable. He has been one of the people to change the paradigm, and it has taken him decades to do this. He's one of the first people that looked at the data and said there's something going on here, and it certainly merits more investigation. What makes Vallée a unique figure in the whole apology scene is that he's a person whom everyone, the skeptics and the believers, all take very seriously. Jacques Vallée made an impact on the world in so many different ways. He's a talented science fiction writer. He's a talented novelist. He's a talented computer scientist. He was one of the earliest folks to apply computer technology to UFO world to figure out how to organize data. Any conversation you have with Jacqueline, any interview you do with them, he talks about the need for more data. There's never enough data. My father made a lot of people feel more comfortable accepting the idea that UFOs could be real. I think Jacques has taken people even further in getting them to question the very origin of the phenomena. Jacques Vallée is a hugely intelligent man. He's a true out-of-the-box thinker. When he started, a lot of the things that he was saying were very fringe. They've now become mainstream. When the history of this subject is written, Jacques Vallée's name will be writ large, and rightly so. For more than 6 decades, Jacques Vallée has made invaluable contributions to help solve the UFO mystery, and continues to even today. Will his lifetime of incredible research and scientific exploration soon lead to real answers about what has been happening in our skies for thousands of years? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: whenever we arrive at the truth, It will be largely due to the work of Jacques Vallée. I still haven't solved it, but I felt that in my life I would not be able to make a contribution at the right level to influence finding the answer. I've made a contribution alongside with a number of very bright people, and all you can hope in science is to make one contribution.